In a lot of Shiny apps, you often want to include some export button that allows you to export some analysis as a PDF report or raw data as an Excel file. The second thing is actually even a meme. People always want to export stuff as Excel, so you should definitely know how you can put this into your Shiny app. And in today's video, I'll show you how to take an app that I've built for this demo purpose to include some export buttons to export stuff as PDF and Excel. So let's take a look at how this app looks and then let's think about how to enhance this. Let's dive in. So here is an app code that I put together for this video. Let's just start this app and see what we have. And basically you see that it's one app that has a sidebar, it has a value box in here, and then there is a plot of penguins from the Parma Penguins package. And whenever I toggle this drop-down menu, then I can switch to a different penguin species, and a different species is highlighted inside of the chart, and a different number is available inside of the value box. If we look at the code for this, let me minimize the viewer here. Then we see that it's just a page sidebar followed by a sidebar that contains a select input that is the drop down here. Then we have a headline here. This is the one we see in the app here, followed by a value box and then a card where it's simply a card filled with a card header and a card body where the body is filled with a plot output. And this is the plot that we see here. And in order for this to actually show something, same as the number output here, it is actually also a text output. In order for all of this to work, we need some code on the server side, and it's a fairly simple code here. It just looks verbose because the ggplot code is quite long. Don't worry about the plotting part here. The point is that we have a reactive that is just a data set, the original Parma Penguins data set, filtered to the selected species that is chosen in the drop-down menu. And then this reactive is rendered as a text inside of the value box, and also it is used in the plot code. So all in all, it's just one data set that is filtered and then it's plotted and the number is calculated with it. That's all there is to it inside of this app. So now that you know the layout of the app, let's think about how to enhance this. In our case, I just want to add an export button into the sidebar, and when a user clicks it, then the user will be prompted to download the file. Let's do this for the PDF file first. And to make this work, all we have to do is to go into our sidebar and add another button in there. Normally, I would put in an action button and then on the server side have some code that will do something so that data is downloadable. But in this particular case, there is actually a different button that we need to use, namely the download button. It works a little bit differently on the server side, but on the UI side, it is just the regular input where you first have an ID and then you have some label. Let's call it download report, and we can also add an icon with the Shiny icon function where we can use the file PDF icon. And now if we re-execute everything, we see that we have a download report button here. Maybe let's actually call this export report because export is shorter and then it goes all in one line. And now notice that as I try to hover over this button or try to click on it, nothing is doable. The button isn't activated yet. And that's the specialty of this download button, because it doesn't do anything. It doesn't even allow the user to do anything unless the server side component is also defined. So let's do that next. Let's head into our server and let's create something that renders the output, and we can do that just like we normally would. We would just take the output ID and then we need a render function, and in this case we can check once again it is download handler, and here we need two arguments. Let me just close the viewer and open up the documentation. Then we see that a download handler needs file name and content. So let's copy this part in here, and now let's think about what these two arguments actually do. Inside of the documentation it says that it can be a function that returns a string of the file name that will be downloaded, or it could be a hard-coded file name, but in a lot of cases we want to have something dynamic. So let's make sure that this function returns the name of the species followed by _report.pdf. So let's use the glue function to create a string that that uses variable. In this case, the variable is just the input with the ID in species. And then we can just append _report.pdf to this. And that way we have a function that generates the name of the file to be downloaded. And for the content, it looks like we need a function that depends on an argument called file that will just write the data that we actually want to export to a file of this particular name. So here we can replace this with something that actually renders a PDF for us. And as you know, my favorite way to render PDFs is to use the Quarto package to render a Quarto document. And for that, I actually need a Quarto document. And if I look into my file explorer, you will see that I have a file called report template.qmd here, which is actually something I have created in a different video. So if you haven't seen that, you can check it out after this video here. But really all you need to know is that this generates a PDF file that looks something like this. And when I say something like this, I mean it looks exactly like this. It generates a parameterized report for the penguin species, and all that it needs is to fill in the parameter species inside of the YAML header of this Quarto file. And if I were to use ATHLY here, then the exact same thing would work. It would just be a different plot and a different number in here, and that's it. And if you've been paying attention, this is exactly the kind of thing that we've also been seeing inside of our Shiny app. So really, we only need to link our input of our Shiny app to this parameter here and then render the report using the Quarto render function. So as an input for the render function, we just refer to our report template QMD file, and then we specify the execution parameters, which is just a list that contains the parameters that we need for this document. In our case, that's just a species, and we link it to the input that was selected in the drop-down menu. So now with that, we can re-execute our code and start our app. And you can see here the button is available now. It actually does something as I'm hovering over it. And as I press on this, you can see that it actually tries to download something, but we see already here that it's .html, which is usually a sign that something went wrong. So let's cancel this and check out our output here. And there we see in the console that apparently the Quarto file was rendered. So that's not something we did wrong. But now that we think about it, we actually never specified that the file later is supposed to be inside of the file of the name that is specified inside of the function. So that's the part we missed, and that's why we actually didn't get the PDF that we wanted when we were prompted to download something. So that's why we see here that the output was created at report_template.pdf, which is not necessarily the name that is inside of the argument of the function. So that's why all we have to do is to copy this file to the other file location here. And for that, we use the file copy function. We take the path to our initial file and we move it to the destination that it is supposed to have. So with these changes, let's try to redo this. Now let's try to export this. And now we see that it actually generates a PDF file and it's called ATHLY_report. So that's nice. And now if I open up my downloads, I can see that this is the report that I wanted to see. And if I were to select a different species, say Gen2, we see that if we click on this, we are prompted to download a file called Gen2_report. So that's nice. And if we open up that file, we see that it is now the report for the Gen2 species. See, this is the one for ATHLY, this is Gen2, looks different to me. Sweet, our app now makes it possible to export data as a PDF, or rather an analysis as a PDF. Now let's do the exact same thing, but for Excel exports. For that, we just have to go into our UI again and copy the download button part. Let's call this button export Excel, and the icon name for an Excel file is file Excel. And now if we re-execute this, we see that we have a new button now, but of course it doesn't work yet because we haven't done anything on the server side. So let's also copy this part here. And now let's say that this is supposed to target the button export Excel button. And this time the name of the file that is supposed to be generated is species name _raw.xlsx. And for the code that generates the Excel file, we could just take our data set or our reactive that has the necessary data inside of it. We just take it and then we pass it to the open XLSX package, or we just say write XLSX, and the file output name is supposed to be the one that is the argument of the function name that goes into the content argument. And now if we retry this, we can can download this, and it now tells us to download something called ATHLY raw XLSX. And if we download that, we can see that we have our data, but only ATHLY data is included here, but it doesn't really look nice yet, which is technically fine. But why don't I show you also how to make this a little bit nicer? Why don't we make sure that the column names are in bold letters and also that the columns here are wide enough to display the full names? For that, we can make use of other functionalities from the OpenXLSX package, but we have to structure our code a little bit differently. So let's remove this part here, and instead let's create a so-called workbook. This is the thing that will be later saved into an Excel file. It can consist out of multiple pages, and inside of this workbook we add the first page to it that we call data. Then we have to specify a header style, which is nothing but a style created by the OpenXLSX package using the create style function, where we just say that the text decoration is bold. And if you look into this function, you see that there are many more arguments that can style things or cells inside an Excel file differently. But for now, we'll just use this simple text decoration thing, and then we can just write data inside of our current worksheet using the penguins data set and specifying that the header style is supposed to be the header style that we've just created. And once we have this data inside of the Excel workbook, we can set the column widths using another function from the OpenXLSX package, where we specify that we want to set the column widths inside of the current worksheet, and there we want to target all of the columns, which is why we go from the first column to the last column of our data set, and then we specify the widths for all of these columns. And that's basically the whole magic of how to set column widths. But of course, this doesn't mean yet that our Excel file was actually created inside of the file directory or inside of the file location. So that's why we have to also call the save workbook function to save the workbook into the file location. And in case there already is something, we will just overwrite it. So now if we re-execute this thing, we can export stuff, we can save it again. And if we now look into our Excel file, we see that the first line has bold text in it, and also the column widths are larger than they have been before. Of course, this is only a simple change, but in case you need very elaborate Excel outputs, you could technically do that too and orchestrate everything through a Shiny app. Fantastic. We now know how to export stuff from within Shiny apps. And in case you're wondering how I generated the PDF report using Quarto, then you might want to check out this video here next, because I show you every step of the way in there. And now, with all of that said, I say thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.